Good morning. I think you can see from the title page that this is going to be a long presentation. The idea behind this, however, is that it is one group of 40 plus odd slides that's going to be broken down into three or four different mini presentations taken up or sent up to YouTube. The idea of the long presentation, I think, was necessary for this memoir because it doesn't seem to have the same sort of breakdown that a Paper Towns novel did, or for example, The Knife of Never Letting Go, that has chunks of information broken down into, or chunks of the novel broken down into section one, section two. And a lot of the things, it seemed to me, with his storytelling technique, things would weave in and out, and didn't seem to me to make sense to do it in a chronological fashion. So it's going to be broken down into a topic. Ever so often, you'll see a subject slide. That'll either be the beginning of a video or an end of a video and repeated at the start of the next video. But anyway, this will be a long slideshow. I hope the presentations are short enough to be bearable. One of the things I've stressed throughout is the idea of making connections. And it does strike me that as a coming of age novel, and as a coming of age memoir, these two seem to have copied, or not copied, but seem to have used some of the same motifs, some of the same elements. And it's important, I think, with all of those to understand that those motifs, for the most part, are part of growing up, are part of being a young adult, are part of being an adolescent. Paper Towns, for example, use classic literature. Moby Dick, Leaves of Grass, A Long Way Gone, the play Julius Caesar, is a key element, I think, in how Bay is able to survive the war. Okay. We had metaphors, strings, grass, cracked vessels. We have the moon as a metaphor in A Long Way Gone. We had musicians like Woody Guthrie and Wilco. Music plays an important element early on, and several other points in the memoir. Finally, look, the road trip took up a big chunk of the tale of the last part of Paper Towns. Travel, walking to escape the war, walking to get to the sea, the travel outside of the city to the final journey in New York, the travel to the earlier journey in New York when he was working with the UN. All of those, I think, are ways to connect a novel written in 2008 about people living in a first world suburb and a memoir about being a boy soldier in a horrific war. Also, I think there were some, perhaps I'm going to call them deeper connections. The mirrors and windows from page 55, or the mirrors and windows from Paper Towns. And if you look at page 55 here, sometimes we ran after people shouting that we were not what they thought. In other words, they were being reflected on as evil, terrible people. They lacked the mirrors to show them who they truly were, and they lacked people in their lives who were windows who helped them get through the darkness. That mirrors and windows quotation, I think, applies to situations like this one as well. Perhaps I'm fishing a little bit, but I don't think so. I think that the novel and the memoir are both making the same sort of point. Also, I thought there was a connection between A Long Way Gone, discussing the idea of the town and how the town becomes real through the people and the type of people who live there. And in Paper Towns, the idea of paper people in paper houses having an unreal experience in this first world suburb. I think they're making some of the same point. The presence of the people and their spirit brings the town life and determines what kind of life occurs inside that town. And finally, we discussed fate versus free will. I should have italicized Paper Towns, but the miracle, the strings inside him broke, the idea of he liked being bored and he didn't want to, but he did. All of those seem to be fate, and some direct implications of fate from A Long Way Gone. Were they fated to come together? Was it the storytelling that brought them together? In the life of a person, What is it that determines, their fate? The big metaphor that runs throughout Paper Towns, or excuse me, runs throughout A Long Way Gone, is the moon. And as we go through the moon and discuss the moon, it, like the strings, seems to take on multiple meanings. I would argue that Bay does a better job of providing context than Green did in Paper Towns, but that's a discussion we can have in class as we go through this. First of all, the moon was something that kind of looked over people almost like a mother goddess, for lack of a better word. And we're going to take a look at that in several ways. But it was a reminder to be on the best behavior, to be good to others. But in addition to reminding to be in the best behavior and be good to others, there was a reminder that the moon brought happiness and that the moon allowed people to have individual experiences. No one grumbles when the moon shines. A lot of happy things happen when the moon shines. But remember that everyone could appreciate that in their own special way. People who hate the heat could appreciate the cool. People with a lot of imagination could appreciate how it seems to change and how one can find different shapes in the moon and in the craters on the moon. And so, striving to be like the moon, remembering to be good to others because the moon is watching, to be in our best behavior because the moon is watching, remembering not to grumble, remembering to show appreciation in our individualistic sort of ways, and remembering that it's happy, it's a happy occurrence. Perhaps this was a preachy thing, but again, remember, young adult literature, adolescent literature is supposed to be somewhat didactic. The moon also became this metaphor. Okay, his journey, at least in his mind, was like that of the moon. He had thick clouds coming his way. He had things that were going to make his spirit dull. But the moon would peek through the clouds. He would come through the clouds. We can get a bit of foreshadowing here, as if we couldn't because of the fact that it's a memoir. But we get this bit of foreshadowing here that he got through this okay. And the moon being able to shine through the clouds, he is going to have to find ways to get through the clouds that are in his path. And it seems to me that a lot of the things that came through his path were thicker and nastier than clouds, but we'll keep moving from there. At times, it seems like the moon is also the ideal audience, telling us what we're supposed to be thinking. Okay? The idea of weeping, the idea of avoid seeing what was happening because it's painful to look at. The moon seems to be doing that. So again, we have the moon as a metaphor, an extended metaphor for Bay in his life in Sierra Leone. We also, I think, have the moon as a bit of a metaphor, almost a Greek chorus for what the audience should be feeling. The moon intervening, I talked about the moon as this mother goddess. Here, the moon disappeared, and when it took the stars with it, that personification of the moon's actions, it saves us from the red bullets. That personification, once again, bringing it into the divine, into the mother goddess sort of stage. I think it's important to remember that, like strings, where there were 7 or 8 different versions of strings, Bay is using the moon in several ways as well. Again, we can discuss in class whether he's consistent enough with it or not, but I think that that's an important element to think about. Another one, the idea of it was driven away. Again, the source of happiness being driven away, the way, a method of appreciation being driven away, the moon as this reminder to do good, to be good, driven away as they're getting ready to go out and fight, if I remember the passage correctly. Also, the moon stays with what it is. One of the things to remember about metaphor frequently is that metaphor starts out as this concrete thing and then becomes the comparison. Okay? The moon is a way of telling time. Our first calendars were based on the moon and the 28-day cycles. And the sun and the moon here told him that it was day or told him that it was night, told him the time, but they were incomplete. He had no idea of the Sunday or Friday. And again, the moon losing its metaphoric power, losing its earth, losing its goddess power, losing some of those other things, and being reduced to just merely a method of time, as he's kind of being reduced from this human who cares about others to this boy soldier who's taking a lot of drugs and watching a lot of war movies and going out and engaged in killings. Those things, I think he does a good job of telling the story and tying it in with with the moon, and then bringing it back to when he's in the rehab center, and again the moon, and returning to when he was younger, turning to the shapes, and wanting the sky to talk to him, wanting to reconnect to his youth, wanting to reconnect to his traditions, and the idea of the moon being the source of those traditions in some ways, his grandmother's stories. Again, I'm just going to repeat, like Paper Towns with strings, or like Paper Towns with the cracked vessel, Bay uses the moon in a multiple number of ways to make different points. And the question is, does he do it well? Does he do the overkill? And that's, again, something I think we can talk about as we go through class if you have any questions about it. I tend to think he does it better, but I'm open to discussion about that. And then finally, I'm not sure if it's finally, there might be one or two slides. The moon is the part of the happy ending. Whenever I get the chance to observe the moon now, I still see those same images I saw when I was 6, and it pleases me to know that part of my childhood is still embedded in me. Again, this is page 17. The moon was the literary device that foreshadows the happy ending. It is part of the metaphor. It is the full journey of his circle. When he is young, it's the reminder to be happy, to be good. When it disappears, he's in that boy soldier stage where he is neither happy nor good. And now at the tail end, he can once again see the images in the moon. His childhood is still embedded with him. That good and those traditions that were good are still in him. The moon comes full circle with him. And I think I think Bay does a good job with the moon, a good job as a storyteller dealing with the moon. And I think he does it a little bit better than Green does with strings. The next section will be on Bay and tradition, Bay and the oral tradition. We'll be talking, I think, about tradition as a building of the social contract, but that's for next time. We're going to wrap it up here for today. Hope you all have a good day, and we'll see those of you watching this in class on Friday, and those of you who aren't watching this one right now. So I'm really making a stupid comment here. I'm just going to move on. We'll see those of you in class on Friday.